really am delighted to have Greg with us today because, well, we almost lost Greg. We almost lost Greg twice. Once at a very early part of the career where he almost became, he could have been a pro footballer, and we'll come on to that. And just more recently, Greg has gone through 2 cancer operations. So, I'm really delighted that you're still there, you're still fighting, and you're with us today. So thanks, Greg. Let's talk about that. There was clearly a point in your life which the path to law wasn't necessarily straightforward. So how did that happen?
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
Well, I guess it's not like you've always wanted to. You were always going to be a lawyer.
Actually, that was my plan, to be honest.
Okay.
I grew up on a small farm in a small town, and I knew I didn't want to farm. It was extremely difficult life, to be honest with you. And my mother was on the library board. She was a nurse, and she would bring books home from the time I can remember, 5, 6, 7 years old. And there are always books about the founders of our country, military people, and it seemed like almost all of them were lawyers. And so I was very infatuated with politics, with the law, and with the military, and they were all end up being very involved in my early life and still are today. So yeah, I did. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't even know any lawyers. We had only a few people in my extended family even went to college, but I that's what I wanted to do.
Okay. So as you said, you didn't know any lawyers, first of all.
No.
Have there been sort of lawyers in that early stage then that started to act as milestones for you and shape your understanding of what the law was and what it was to be a lawyer?
There was one. There was a judge that we went to church with, and he brought me over to Indianapolis. I was probably a junior or a senior in high school, and he invited me to come over for law day. And that was the first time I'd really ever talked to him. And he kind of talked to me about it, but I really didn't understand what it meant, and which I'll explain later. But I just knew that was that and sports were my ticket out of where I was, to be honest with you.
Okay, but you had a flirtation with the sports then, well, with a pro football.
Well, I was blessed with talent, I guess you'd say. And we had a really, really good high school team. And even though I was from a very small town, got a lot of attention, got recruited all over the country, and actually signed at Florida State originally. And then that's kind of when I started finding out about law school, is that there was another guy down there, and he called me and he said, if you want to go to law school, and I hope I don't offend any FSU people that may be on the line, but he said they could care less if you ever go to class. He said they're going to give you C pluses and Bs, but they don't really want you to go to class. They want you to be over at the football facilities. At the same time, I had played in a high school all-star game, and it lasted till a lot of schools had already started. And so kind of one of my last choices was the University of Evansville, which was a small Division I school in the Missouri Valley Conference. And so I ended up there the day before practice started, and then played. Unfortunately, or probably fortunately, to be honest, I got hurt really bad several times. I had 7 knee operations, I had a kidney issue. I broke my arm twice. It, it was pretty brutal. So by the time I got to be a junior, I was still playing, but I knew that avenue to do anything above that in the NFL was probably over, which made me really focus, to be honest with you, on school. Because when you're walking around in a cast half the time, there ain't much else to do. But then I started finding out that, which I had no clue. I just thought you applied to law school and they let you in. I had no idea. And my counselor told me after my freshman year, I had about a 2.7, I think. And I thought I was really knocking it out of the park. And he goes, there's two things going on. Number one, the Vietnam War. And number two, to get into law school, you got to have at least a 3.2, 3.3, 3.4. And I'm going, you got to be kidding. He goes, no. He said, so you better get your act together if you even want to have a prayer of doing this. And I got my act together.
So, Greg made reference to the Vietnam War. This is going to shock many of you, but Greg revealed to me when we were chatting the other day that he's over 70. And I think, we struggle to believe that, but that means from those early days of, I think I'll go to law school, I want to be a lawyer, to where you are now, there's a huge amount of experience, in that time. And the fact that having started, you've stuck with it as well. How would you break down the different stages of your law career?
Well, like most things in life, it's all being at the right place at the right time. During law school, I got recruited by my dad was involved in politics. He was a farmer, but he was a Democrat county chairman for the county I grew up in. And so when I was in law school, I got recruited by the law school Democrat club, which there was about 5 of us, I think. Dan and Tyler and some of the other guys back then the Democrat Party in Indianapolis was almost non-existent, to be honest. So I thought, what the heck? So I joined that, and lo and behold, in 1974, when Watergate hit, the Democrats won every office. And there were very few young Democrat lawyers, so they asked me if I would be chief deputy for the what we'd call the state's attorney's office in a lot of states. It's called it's the prosecutor's office here. So I went right from law school to be the chief deputy of about 150 attorneys. And I did that for 4 years and then continued to be very active in the party. And then I was special counsel of the U.S. Attorney's Office for 4 years after that. So that got me into public service, got me into politics at the same time, really. And that was kind of my entree. I traveled all over the country, met a lot of different people. During that time, President Carter asked me to be on the SALT Treaty committee, and I helped negotiate the Israel-Egypt SALT 2 agreement. I was on the DNC, the DCCC, and about everything else you can think of. And that gave me, again, a lot of contacts all over the country. One guy was Chuck Manette, who Greg Bergman would know about. He was an attorney from Los Angeles and was chairman of the Democrat Party. And so I basically worked with him and then his firm in Washington, D.C. for about 5 years. And it just kept going from there.
So when you think back to that time, Greg, I mean, even at an early stage, I mean, you were, fully involved and fully stretched. And as you said, you went from law school straight into, to looking after,
State's attorney's office.
State's attorney's office, but it's a pretty big role. As a young lawyer, did you have imposter syndrome? or what would be called imposter syndrome now? Or did you just go, well, hell, I'm young, the world is my oyster, and bring it on? What were your thoughts at the time?
Pretty much the latter. I went to different seminars, I was over like 6 divisions, back in the 70s, as some of you would know, we went from doing files on 3x5 cards to having the justice system come in, which was computerizing the office. We went from having, this is no kidding, we had 150 lawyers. I think we had 6 phones. So we had to modernize that. And there was a lot of that kind of stuff that we had to do that hadn't been done. So that was quite an experience there, just the administrative side of it, not counting the managing all the attorneys. And then I also tried probably 30 or 40 jury trials in that 4 years.
And if you look back at that point, if you had to pick out 1 or 2 things that you thought that's as a key learning from that period in my life, both from a perspective of, wow, that was amazing, and potentially I went down the wrong path, hit something, learned fast, and moved on. What would you say?
Well, I'll be honest with you about what we're talking about today. I had some really good mentors. I had a guy named John Dillon, who had been the Attorney General for Indiana. He was a 2-star general, had a national reputation. He took me under his wing. In fact, I joined his law firm. Back then, you could do both. You could be on the state's attorney's office and in private practice. And then he introduced me, obviously, to a lot of people. And then I had another guy that I worked with up in outside of Chicago, that was kind of the attorney up in northwestern Indiana, who was an incredible mentor as well. And I just was very fortunate that I kept running into these people, and they would take me under their wing and say, okay, we need to do this, you need to do that, you need to join this. Because I really didn't know. I mean, it was just all, again, kind of being at the right place at the right time. As far as running down any paths, probably and again, you don't know, I ran for Attorney General in 1980, so I took about a year off to run for office. And the positive side was that I met tons of people that I still talk to today. And then I ran again in 84. So there were positives, but on the negatives, it took, kind of took the steam out of my practice for a while, because I dedicated 2 years to doing that, 80 and then back again in 84. So anybody that's ever run for statewide office, I mean, it's a full-time job. And my law firm was kind enough to let me stay and do that. So.
Wow. What do you love about your practice?
I love all the different people I get to meet. This being involved with Mackrell has been incredible. The expansion of friendships and relationships, not only here in the United States, which I had a pretty good base already, but meeting people from around the world has been spectacular. And probably, I've told you this is probably one of the best in my whole career. This is probably the best thing I've ever done. You end up becoming friends. Not only are you referring business and working together, but many people that we all know and go to the meetings. I mean, we've become very good friends and talk, all the time, actually.
So if we pick up on that, I mean, we have, the network and the main contacts of the network, as you say, we've got a number of people on this call who've been part of the network for a long time. You and Greg Bergman as a good example. We have Elaine and Merrill who are part of the sort of fabric of the network and hold it together and have been there for Elaine for decades, since she was very young. and Merrill for over a decade. That's brilliant because you've had that time to meet and get to know each other. The past 12 months, we've been doing everything virtually. We've got a group of up and coming lawyers on this call and who will be listening to this at a later stage, trying to get some insight into what can I learn, from these experienced lawyers, and yet who either haven't had that opportunity because we haven't had the chance to meet, or may not for some time get to go to a meeting. What can they do to use the Mackrell International Network to create contacts and build the type of relationship that you're calling spectacular?
Well, obviously, it's a lot more difficult than when you get to spend, like several of us, Merrill and Greg and I don't know, other folks that have gone to the international meetings. I mean, you get to spend some really quality time together, not just in the meetings, but socializing in the evenings. And a lot of times, some of us will go off and spend another 3 or 4 days. If we're in India, we'll go someplace else, or Spain. We went to Marrakesh, and you just create, you just strengthen those bonds. Now, I'll tell you, we've probably had, Libby and I, my wife, we've probably had 10 or 15 Zoom calls, cocktail parties with different members of Mackrell. And now that's easier to do because we've got a relationship. On trying to build a new relationship is going to be harder. But, I guess my advice would be for some of these folks to just reach out to somebody, pick somebody out and try to develop hey, can we have a Zoom call and just get to know each other? It's set it for 15, 20 minutes and try to do maybe one a week or something, so that when we do get back in the saddle for our regional meetings or our international meeting, you've already met some of these folks.
So basically, invest that time in the get to know, and
Right.
It's something that lawyers, actually generalizing a little bit, do pretty well. That sense of let's have a coffee, let's have a cat. Who are you? What do you do? What's your practice area? And
Right.
within the network, there's a facility to do that, even virtually.
Correct. It's been, and I've talked to several other members of Mackrell, mostly here in the United States, but our business has not slowed down at all. In fact, it's been unbelievable. Now, some of the international stuff, we've had some stuff in Europe over the last year and a half, very little in South America, but we just referred a case down to Mexico City to Rodrigo yesterday. So things are starting to ramp back up, I think, and it's a big deal. So
I think one of the things that's been really encouraging is, yesterday Scott Tarter from Bose was on a call with Will Bowyer from Mackrell Solicitors. Melissa may have been there as well in London, and the practice groups create an opportunity for people across the network to start making those connections as well, and to get involved. It doesn't always have to be about the big meetings. It's starting things off and getting those things going, and don't be shy, I guess. Grab those opportunities.
Right. Totally agree.
If we come back to your mentors for a minute, sort of rewinding a little bit, did they find you, or did they basically take you under their wing, or did you go looking?
No, they took me under. I had no idea what a mentor was. We didn't call it. Nobody said you're a mentor back then. But no, they pretty much just took me under their wing, and showed me the way, introduced me to other people. And I'd seen, to be honest with you, I'd seen my mom and dad do that. My dad was in the military for a number of years besides farming. And so he would try to help some of the younger guys that wanted to get into farming, tough business to get in. And then my mom was a nurse, and so a lot of the women that were, in high school, she was a school nurse for like 40 years, would come to her about, how do I become a nurse? And so I kind of had watched that process. And so I've always tried to do that. I mean, mentoring goes back to the Greece. I think in the I'm trying to remember the Iliad. There's mentions of mentors amongst the Greek soldiers. Even, I mean, we're going back thousands of years. So it's a concept that's been out there for a long, long time. And I'll tell you what I see now, at least in my experience, is trying to help minorities. I was about 20 years ago, I was asked by the mayor of Indianapolis then to help promote minority businesses. I was helping I represented the Indianapolis Public Library System, and we were building a $150 million new library. And everybody wanted to try to attain 20 to 25% of minority participation. And we were successful in doing that. So then I got asked to do it for our new airport, the Lucas Oil, where the Colts play, Bankers Life, where the Pacers play. And so in doing that, I ended up really being a mentor to a lot of those businesses, whether they were women-owned, meebies and weebies, we call them, and helping them figure out how, first of all, they had to get qualified. So I helped them do that, and then how to get into the mix and and it was a rough road. And I do it now. I mean, I've got several folks here in the office that I try to help and give them guidance on, you need to join this, you need to do that, or you need to look at being involved in this, some organizations to meet people.
And you, in the mentoring you've done, then it's something that you've benefited from in your professional and personal career, and you've obviously sort of just implicitly taken it on board to give some of that back. And you've been mentoring for some time. What's changed through the decades?
Well, I think, when you're maybe my first 20, 25 years, I was really focused on getting business, taking care of the business. And I was doing stuff nationwide. I was on the road. I defended a number of class actions around the country. And that just sucked up a tremendous amount of time. And then as things kind of evolved the last 20 years, I was more based here in Indianapolis. I was working out of Washington back and forth all the time. And then when it started with or accelerated when I started doing the public building projects. And it just kind of fell in that I had an opportunity to see what was going on and that a lot of minorities weren't being brought to the table. And the mayor at the time, Bart Peterson, said, we need to change that. And so I started doing it then. So that's probably been, 20, 25 years ago. And then I started getting appointed to some of these not-for-profit boards, and a lot of those were not diverse at all. So I started trying to go out and bring in minorities on those boards, which I've done, and then onto the staffs. So it just kind of keeps evolving.
And it's quite challenging when you challenge the status quo. I mean, you talk about it, sort of one line. I went on and I tried to get minorities onto the board. That's a very short, simple sentence, but it's not easy to do that. I mean, it's not easy to do it now when it's in the 21st century and we're supposedly so much more open and progressive. So you said you started sort of 20 years ago with meebies and weebies, I suppose that's minorities and women. how challenging was it then? And how did you go about that then? Because that's a lot about influence rather than you weren't in a position to go, they're on, that's it. So you had to do an awful lot of influencing.
No, it was very challenging. It's still challenging. I was the chairman. We have a not-for-profit here called the Indianapolis Foundation, which is like the mothership over about 4 other foundation boards, and I'm on all those. And one of them is called the Central Indiana Community Foundation. It's the 19th largest community foundation in the United States, about $1 billion. I've been on it for 12 years, and we had 1 minority on the board out of 19 people. And I told the executive director that had to change, and I would help with that. And we've changed it dramatically. In fact, the young lady that's taking my place used to be here with Bose. She's a Latinx. She left to be general counsel of one of our clients, and she'll be the first Latin to be chairman of this. But we also had a staff of about 70 people, and we had 2 minorities on the staff. And, and then top it off, when I took over chairman, every chairman has to have a program that you want to try to implement. Well, mine was racial diversity and trying to do away with systemic racism. And little did I know that as we entered 2020, where we're going to have a pandemic and all the things that have happened around us. So it was an unbelievable ride, as Dan and Tyler and Steve and some of the other people here know, my wife. It was hours upon hours upon hours. And then I'm also the chairman of our Indianapolis Mass Transit Authority. So we've gone through the same thing there.
So just picking up on all of that, you've, and I've had a couple of really good questions come in, so I'm gonna put those to you, and anybody else, please pop your questions to me in the chat, and I'll put them to Greg. You do so much, as well as your practice, and I know some of these things overlap. You've been doing it for decades. I don't hear a grain of weariness. How do you stay, enthusiastic, and how do you keep that enjoyment and enthusiasm going when you're stretched across all of this and everything is challenging?
Part of it's because I grew up on a farm and I was used to working 10, 12, 14 hours a day, and I'm not kidding. I even had my own trap line because that was my money for any extra money we made. Like a fur, we trap animals, so we'd have to be up at 2 to do that, and then when you got done with that, you had to go feed the cattle and the hogs, and then go to school, and then start all over again when you got home from football, baseball, basketball practice. So I was used to operating on very little sleep, but I try to take care of myself. I work out. I try to eat right. But I'll admit the last year and a half has been really challenging, just with all that, the other things going on. But my practice, I'm blessed. We have just a ton of really good lawyers here. And a lot of the stuff that I bring in are clients I've had for a long time. So I've been able to bring them in. They trust me, and then they find out that the guys they're working with are really good. And then I've got a governmental practice, because not only do we have a law firm, we have about 60 people in our lobbying group. So about a third of my practice is that, and that's here in DC. And again, I've got people helping me with that. So, I'm kind of at this point more of a supervisor, I guess. And I don't have to grind out the documents or I go to court if I have to, if the client wants me to, or I go to meetings. And actually, this Zoom stuff's been pretty handy because it cuts down all the travel. I had to do 30 depositions in 40 days at the beginning of the year. And I can't even imagine if we'd had to travel and do all this. We did them all by Zoom. So that was a big plus because the client wanted me to be at all of them.
So Zoom positives in all of that. So basically you're saying is anybody who's thinking about a legal career should try farming for a little bit firsthand, because it's really good preparation. I guess one, because you'll really appreciate sitting at a desk, and two, you'll be rough and tough and ready for the legal world.
Yeah, I saw Pam Foster's note, so she knows.
She knows, and interestingly, in Tom Chauncey in Arizona said a very similar thing on an America's regional call. He sort of you get bred tough and ready for anything.
You learn how to finish the job. That was always, my dad was, you don't quit till you're done. And there's a lot of that applies to what we do. I mean, you got to be ready. And his saying was, you got to make hay while the sun shines. And so, when you've got business coming in, you got clients, you got to take care of them because you don't know when that rainy day is going to come. And that's how you lived.
I'm going to pick up on that in a second, but I've had a question which sort of goes back to your mentoring a little bit. I'm going to be a little bit cheeky here and say, what makes you special, Greg? That wasn't the essence of the question, but it was when you were being picked out by your mentors, what do you think it was about you and what you were doing and how you were coming across that made people realize this is a guy that we want to mentor? And I might be reading something into the question, but I'm guessing it's a little bit is sort of, how do you, I suppose, particularly in a sort of reasonably sized firm, how do you sort of get noticed, not in an artificial way, so that people mentor you? And why do people why did people take you under their wing and put you into those bigger roles, do you think?
I think part of it was work ethic. Everything I was asked to do, I did. I never complained. I knew how to work hard from the farm life and then playing sports in college. I mean, that's a full-time job too. Again, I don't, at least at where in Division I, it was the whole time, it was a month before school started and it went all summer. So you never got a break. So you're at practice or working out all day, and then you got to study, you got to go to class, and then you got to study all night. So that, I think so I was used to it. And so when people asked me to do stuff, I did it, and I've never complained. I worked hard at it, and I think people knew they could trust me. That's how, it just kept happening. So
I guess you build up a bit of momentum. You put down the foundation of that work ethic and trust, and that sort of trust in delivering, and then people go, well, he does it, he gets it, and he gets it done. So, and then I guess it builds from there.
I think that's right. Yeah. And I just thought that's the way you're supposed to do things, and that's how I did it. Okay.
Do you think, there's a lot of focus nowadays, possibly more than before, on lawyers, particularly mental health, stress, burnout, balancing demanding legal career, the demands of the job, the fact that everything needs to be, you can't go into battle unless you are 100% ready on any matter, and that means that sort of extra workload, as well as all those deadlines that sometimes are client imposed, sometimes are court imposed, sometimes a little bit of both. Do you think that there's been too much emphasis, or about the right emphasis, and how have you balanced that?
No, I think that's a great question. I always tell people they got to balance their family, their work, and their civic activities, so they're not on overload. But they can't be 80% one and 10% the other two. Uh, uh, I think the family is extremely important. Uh, you got to figure out how you're going to do that. It's not easy, as we all know. We all have to sacrifice in this profession, and the same thing with other professions. Uh, but I think you got to work towards that balance. I think the younger attorneys, Sarah Studinsky, who's here and very active with Mackrell, we've talked about it, and you just got to, at some point, you just got to stop and say, okay, I'm gonna go work out. I'm gonna go run. She's a big runner. But you got to have some sort of relief that way, or I think you will burn out. I mean, and that's what I always tried to do. I mean, I've always tried to, I had that long history of exercising and working out, and I don't do it like I used to, but at least try to do something to get your mind off of everything else and just shut down for a while. But I think the mental health thing it's probably something we've all overlooked, to be honest, in our profession. And I think there's a lot more emphasis on it, at least in our bar association, both the Indianapolis and the state bar, of if you've got issues, that they've allocated a lot of resources now to try to help people.
There's still sort of the mentor thing seems to have sort of struck a chord, because switching tack again slightly, because of another question come in about, from your mentors, was there a piece of advice, something that you've carried with you, either from one of your mentors or externally? What's that one or those two pieces of advice that you've thought, yeah, that's what I'm carrying through my life, and that's something I'm going to live and work on?
I think probably one of the biggest pieces of advice I got early was not to get off my feet, so to speak. I was getting exposed to a lot when I was really young. With Carter, I was just out of law school, and I was put on that committee with a lot of people that were well known, and it could go to your head, and one of them especially, and Chuck Manette was another one, who was the chairman of the National Democrat Party when Carter was president. He said, you can't let that stuff get to your head, because you want to start running with these guys, and there's no way. And they're not running in the same path you're running on. Just accept where you are, accept what you're getting out of this, learn from it, but don't lose who you are and the fact you're from Indianapolis, Indiana. You're not from LA or Las Vegas or New York or Miami and flying in and out of here on your own private jet and all that stuff. He said, you gotta avoid all that.
And how easy or how difficult was it to sort of hear that and absorb it and take it on board, and versus, yeah, but I'm young and I'm in the middle of it and it's amazing?
Well, it was hard, because I would get invited to go places, do things, and that was going to be not with my family. But of course, your ego's like, oh, geez, I get to go to the Super Bowl with the owner of the Miami Dolphins, or I get to do this with the publisher of the Las Vegas paper, Greenspan, in Las Vegas. And I'll be honest with you, I did do it once in a while, but I saw what Chuck was talking about. You can get dragged into that stuff and get lost pretty quick. So that was hard. And then I guess I have to talk about this. I represented Trump Entertainment for 14 years. So I went through that whole process of being around him. And that was another, with Jeffrey Epstein and that whole crew. And but then I was much more mature, and I saw what was coming. And there were people around him that told me, stay away from him. Don't get on his plane with him. Don't go to dinner with him. Of course, all he ate was McDonald's and Domino pizza anyway, but.
And that wouldn't sit with your sort of healthy lifestyle either, and your training regime.
But that was advice. And again, hey, he was rocking and rolling, and we were doing deals all over the country, and I thought that would be wonderful. That'd be cool. And then I kind of saw what was going on, and I thought, and I mean, his own people told me, don't do it. Don't go when you get invited. So.
And so now you're the person that, people are saying, whoa, Greg Hahn's up there, shaking and moving things. And so you got to keep your feet on the ground. One day you can be like Greg. What advice would you give? So, keep your feet on the ground. That sounds pretty sensible. You've seen a whole sort of host of young lawyers come through Bose over the years. What advice have you given, and what advice would you give to folk on the call and who will listen to this afterwards?
Well, one thing is personalization. I mean, I still get business from people I met 40 years ago. It's a really wild world we live in, and people that I worked with, attorneys and other people 45 years ago, I still get business. One of them would end up being the managing partner of Aiken Gump, and anything that happens in the Midwest, they still send to me. And I could say that about, a lot of other people, but I send out personally, sign, and write a note to over 3,000 people every year for New Year's. I've done it for years and years. And I always tell my wife, Libby, it's amazing because within 30 days of sending those cards out, which some of you guys get, I'll get a phone call with, oh, hey, we had this happen. I haven't talked to you in 10 years, but can you help me out? So that's one thing. I mean, just keeping up with people and letting them know that you're thinking about them. I mean, it makes a difference. It really does. And then, I try to go to lunch or dinner with a client or another attorney or just a friend, a political friend. We represent the city of Indianapolis, a bunch of municipalities. Like tomorrow I'm going down, we represent Evansville down in southern Indiana. So we're flying down there in the morning to meet with all of them. We're working on a new jail deal. But now that we can start getting out again, I'm just lining people up to go back and talk to. In fact, I read an article the other day that the president and the other two top guys at Goldman Sachs have rented a bus, and they left Manhattan, I think last week, and they're going to California, and they're stopping at every one of their major clients. They're going to be gone a month.
So is that going to be the new Bose battle bus?
No.
Corporate colors, you driving,
right?
Going around the state and neighboring states.
I used to drive semi, so I don't have my CDL right now, but I could get it. That's our commercial driver's license.
Do you think, again, coming back to sort of young lawyers, you talked about sort of writing, doing a sort of handwritten letter,
right?
And nowadays things are sort of changing so fast, everything's so digital. Do you think that's a sort of a bane or a boon for sort of next generation, new generation lawyers?
I think it's a bane personally. I mean, I tell everybody that I'm working with or I'm talking to, that you need to write a handwritten note, send in an email or a text or LinkedIn or any of the other social media, Facebook. It just isn't the same. It's not as personalized. And I can't tell you, I mean, when I go to a lunch and I meet somebody new for the first time, I send them a note. And I can't tell you how many times I get a phone call back saying, I haven't gotten a note from anybody and I don't know when. I really appreciate that. And I think the same thing with lawyers on cases on the opposite side. We all have, a lot of people have this tendency to, they want to send everything by email. They want to text. And then if there's a disagreement, those things accelerate and get negative. And I've read some of them. I said, pick up the phone and call them. People send emails and stuff out a lot of times. And then about 10 minutes later, they go, oh, I wish I hadn't have sent that. And then it creates, acrimony, hard feelings. And that shouldn't be that way. I mean, we're on the opposite sides of stuff, but that doesn't mean when the case is over, we're like, we're on the same, you may be on the same side the next time. So no, that's one thing I do not like, is that people have kind of gravitated to this, just sending emails and texts, and they don't want to talk to anybody on the phone.
Even when they're sort of sitting next to somebody, or 2 desks away.
Yeah, right. Even within the office.
Is there anything else, again, thinking about the sort of young lawyers coming through Bose and maybe in some of the businesses, not necessarily young lawyers, young professionals that in the businesses you're involved in, that again, if you could sit them all down in a room and give them a piece of advice, what would that be? Other than take the time. You're not saying write everything. You're saying every now and then write a note, because it's so unexpected and it's so personal, and it's very powerful when you read someone that's actually taken the time to actually write something down, unless it's your doctor.
Right. I mean, I tell everybody you need to get involved in some sort of civic activity, whether that's the symphony, the library, politics, which is what mine was, but that's just me. But something you're interested in. Every organization I know of, and I work with a lot of them, are looking for good people. And they all look for lawyers because, they know that we're educated and we have a broad perspective on things. And then, if you got 20 people on that board, there's 19 opportunities there to get to know people. And, you may not get any business the first year, the second year, but, the third year or the fourth year, something may come up and they go, hey, I've been on that board with you and I really respect you. And you're with a good law firm. I've got an estate, excuse me, that my family's involved in, I need some help with, or a business transaction. I can't tell you how many times it happened to me yesterday, actually, on a board I'm on. So, that's my first piece of advice, is get active in some organization. Besides being the bar association is great, meeting other lawyers and all that, but other civic activities. And, most of us are all from major metropolitan areas, so there's tons of opportunities.
I think that's something that's been echoed by, I think, every mentor. Lorraine Kavataya from Sandberg Phoenix, Maggie from Rwanda, who was on, Suchai in Singapore. Everybody has said it's partly touching on what you were saying about your life not just being about the law, having sort of enriching it through other things, and partly those connections you make. You don't go out specifically, deliberately to say, I'm going to get involved in this so I can make business connections. But through that, when they find out who you are, they get to know you, and you're a lawyer. Law is everywhere. It's in everything. It creates the infrastructure for everything. And people go, can you help me with this? Or do you know how I can do this? And then there's a sort of ability to go, yeah, I can help you, or I can put you in touch with one of my team.
Exactly.
Are there any things, again, coming back to young lawyers? I think Alison in London, I asked her this directly when she did her mentor series, which was mentor session, which is, apart from perhaps an over-reliance on sending emails, is there anything about younger lawyers that is a bugbear to you? And as a second part of that question, how much of that do you think is just a generational difference, and how much of that is something that you think, no, that's important for younger lawyers to be aware of?
Well, I think it's a generational. I mean, obviously communications and a large part of our daily practices changed dramatically. You know, I can remember when I sent the first fax. I was working on a deal 25, 30 years ago. I didn't know what they were talking about. I was working with Citibank in New York, and they said, we're sending you a fax of this agreement. And I'm going, what are you talking about? And it was delivered by Federal Express. Then that was the first ones. So I don't know if anybody's on this has been around that long, but that was probably 82. So, I mean, there's just been a gigantic, Lloyd, it's just been a gigantic change in how we process things. And, it used to be you'd get a phone call to look at something, they'd mail it to you or bring it by, and then you'd have 4 or 5 days to look at it, get back to them. Well, now they email it to you with a PDF attached, and then they want to know what you think, 2 hours from it. So the whole process is speeded up dramatically. And I mean, the whole practice. I mean, Keith, when I first started practicing law, they shut down all the courts in Indianapolis except for one court. You had summer court, and that was it. Everybody left town. I mean, there was nothing going on.
Wow.
And I mean, in 74, 75, and then eventually that all started changing, but that was just kind of the accepted practice. And you didn't go into that court unless you had something really important, because the judge, he didn't want to be there. And they would take turns. Everybody went up to Michigan for the summer or whatever they did. But I mean, that's how it worked then. So yeah, I think it's generational. I've just seen such a dramatic change in my 47th year, I guess.
So has it made things better? Theoretically, everything's faster.
Oh yeah.
So it should be better. We should be more efficient. We should be getting through more work. We should be billing more. We should have more clients because we're getting through everything quicker.
Well, I think that's true to an extent. I think things are much more complicated. Plus, with the advent of more and more laws, more and more regulations. I don't know how everybody else's jurisdictions are, but our federal courts have more cases pending they've ever had in history. Our state courts are double what they were 5 years ago. I know a lot of the judges are friends of mine, and on both the federal and the state bench, and it increases every year. And yet, part of it is finances. The state won't allocate any more money for more courts, and the federal, they've not done anything, and we're probably, I think, even under their rules, we're 3 federal judges short in the Southern District of Indiana. So I think, the pace we've picked up dramatically, but the amount of legal work is just overwhelming sometimes.
And possibly not the judicial infrastructure to cope with it.
Right. And I think even though we're not trying near the cases we used to, you still got to jump through all the hoops on discovery, and the federal courts, especially, as most everybody knows. I mean, they put these cases on fast track, where, you're you're going full bore right out of the gate, because they want you to get to mediation, and they're being looked at by the federal system on how many cases they're processing. And so they're pushing you to settle everything on mediation, and on and on and on.
Greg, I'm about to give you the last word because it's only fair, but just before we do that, from the assembled group of, I see a couple more seasoned lawyers, attorneys amongst us, and definitely some sort of up and coming. Does anybody have any final questions they want to eke out from Greg's experience? Either sort of pop it in the chat very quickly, or unmute and ask. So I'll give a second or two for people to do that, and if not, Greg, the last word is going to be yours. What would your sort of parting shot be?
Well, number one, I just got to, like I began, especially for the younger lawyers. I mean, having this opportunity with Mackrell is incredible. You have an opportunity to expand your practice and your relationships in a dynamic way that most of the time none of us would ever have the opportunity to, unless you were with Kirkland & Ellis or one of the giant, international firms, and to work with really quality people who are also great lawyers. So that's number one. Number two, I think the practice of law continues to get better and better. I think the quality of attorneys coming out of school had a much better handle on things than I had coming out, because they put a lot more emphasis on practical application in all phases, not just book. I mean, most of our training was strictly out of the law book. We didn't, you had moot court and that was about it. And now there's all these internships and everything else that people can get involved in. So when they get out of law school, they're way ahead of at least where I was. I clerked for 2 years, so I had that experience of working with lawyers and kind of understanding the system. But a lot of my classmates didn't even know where the courthouse was, much less how to file a pleading, or they just somebody had to show them how to do it. But so I'm very optimistic about the future of our profession, and I obviously see a lot more diversity. My law school class of 200, we had 8 women, and now about everybody I talk to, the classes are like 60-40 women, and I had one Black classmate, and I think I talked to the dean the other day. She called me about something she wanted me to help her with, and I think they're about a third. And our law firm has programs where we sponsor minority students. We give them a 3-year full ride and then hire them, as long as they meet, the academic standards that we put forward. So, no, there's a lot of changes, and they're all good.
That's brilliant. I think that's a fantastic place to end. Point of optimism. So, Greg, just thank you so much for your time, for sharing your wisdom and your journey.